This week's episode is titled Rhaenyra Triumphant, and I'm fairly sure that title is a joke, not a funny one. The kind of joke the show is telling at its own queen's expense, because here's what triumph looked like this week. A silver-haired queen, adored by the starving poor and despised by the rich. An empty treasury, a holy man refusing to bless her crown, ghosts in the corridors, rats in the walls, and at the end of it all, a woman staring into fire, promising that her enemies cannot win, while everyone watching at home feels the same cold whisper in the back of their skull. We have seen this story before. Quick warning before we go further. This video talks openly about how Game of Thrones ended. It's been 7 years, but if you're one of the rare people still saving that finale for a special occasion, this is your exit. Everyone else, let's do this properly. Because I don't think House of the Dragon is accidentally echoing Daenerys Targaryen. I think it's doing it on purpose, methodically, scene by scene. The real question, the one worth an entire video, is why? And I see 3 possible answers. By the end, I'll tell you which one I believe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. First, the evidence. Let's walk through this episode with the sound up, because the show hid the parallels in plain sight. Start with the smallest scene, the one most recaps skipped. Rhaenyra is dressing to meet her subjects for the first time, and she tells her handmaiden she wants no jewelry. A sword, perhaps, she says. And the handmaiden gently points out that a sword contradicts a message of peace and offers her something else instead. A chain. Sit with that image. Somewhere down this family tree, generations from now there will be another silver-haired queen whose entire legend is built on one title, Breaker of Chains, and here is her ancestor, at the exact same point in her arc, new to power, hungry to be loved, being dressed for the people. And what does the show hang around her neck? The chain. Not broken. Worn. If you think that's a coincidence, I have a bridge in Old Valyria to sell you. Then the small folk. The single happiest we have ever seen Rhaenyra in 3 seasons of this show is this episode, standing in front of the hungry people of King's Landing, giving a speech and handing out bread and grain with her own hands. And to feed them, she lured the city's wealthiest families to the castle and had the gold cloaks seize the food they were hoarding. Beloved by the poor. Feared and resented by the powerful. A queen who genuinely believes her heart is with the people, taking from lords to fill common bowls. That is not just similar to Daenerys. That is Daenerys, beat for beat, the Meereen years, the mother of a city that worships her right up until the food runs out. Then the faith. The High Septon refuses to anoint her without proof that Aegon is dead, and when she suggests the gods themselves gave her a dragon, he recoils and calls dragons dark magic. A queen locked in a power struggle with the church over the legitimacy of her crown. Now, that one is not actually a Daenerys echo. That's Cersei. And I point it out because it tells us the show isn't tracing one falling queen. It's compositing all of them. It is pulling threads from every ruler in this universe, whoever confused holding the throne with being accepted by the realm. And there's a lore detail here that makes her faith problem even worse than the scene suggests, and I'd bet most viewers don't know it. In this era, the true seat of the faith is not in King's Landing at all. The Great Sept you remember from Game of Thrones doesn't exist yet. The heart of the faith is the Starry Sept, and the Starry Sept is in Old Town, the Hightower's own city. So whatever any Septon says or doesn't say in her throne room, the institution Rhaenyra needs to bless her crown is headquartered, literally, in the enemy's living room, in the shadow of the family whose patriarch she just beheaded. Her legitimacy problem isn't a stubborn priest, it's geography, then the ghosts. Twice this episode, the score turns to those screeching, unsettling violins as Rhaenyra thinks she sees Jace, her dead son, walking toward her through the halls of the Red Keep. Grief, hallucination, isolation, a mind starting to fray under a crown. And here's the detail that makes it deliberate. The composer is Ramin Djawadi, the same man who scored Game of Thrones, the same man who taught your nervous system years ago exactly what a Targaryen sounds like when the walls of their minds start coming down. He is playing you like an instrument, using the same musical language he used on her descendant, on purpose. Your unease during those scenes isn't an accident, it's a callback. Even the rats are a message. The Red Keep is infested because Aegon, back in Season 2, hanged the city's rat catchers in his rage, and nobody ever replaced them. Think about what that means. The vermin overrunning her castle are literally the consequence of the old regime's cruelty, the past she inherited, crawling out of the walls of the present. Whoever sits this throne inherits its rot, which, hold that thought, because it's going to matter for the verdict, and then the ending. Ormond Hightower breaks his oath, seizes Tumbleton, holds its people hostage, and Rhaenyra's first response, her reflex, is fire. She will burn them. and it takes someone else in the room, a dragon keeper, of all people, to remind the queen that dragonfire cannot tell a Hightower soldier from an innocent townsperson. She pulls back, and she ends the episode staring into a bonfire of green banners, eyes rimmed red, promising that her arm is long. Now, everyone who watched Game of Thrones knows the geometry of this moment, so let me name it. Daenerys did not fall because she was born mad. She fell one removed break at a time. For years, there were people in the room, people who could say, "Not this way, not the innocents," and be heard. And the story stripped them away one by one through death and betrayal and distance, until the day the bells rang and there was no one left in the room, and the reflex was all that remained. That's the machine, not madness, subtraction. So watch this episode again and count the breaks. Who stopped the fire this week? Not Daemon, who spent the episode asking her to conquer the world. Not her council, a dragon keeper, a servant who happened to be standing there. The break worked, this time. But the show made a point of showing us how thin it was. And I'm telling you now, this is the number to track for the rest of the season. Every time Rhaenyra is defied, count how many people it takes to talk her down and count who they are. When that number reaches 0, you'll know exactly where you are in the story because you've stood there before. Okay, the evidence is on the table. Now the real question, why is the show doing this? 3 possible readings. Reading 1, it's foreshadowing, the simplest answer. The show is telling us, in the plainest visual language it owns, that Rhaenyra becomes the Daenerys of her era. And this season is the slow, careful version of the collapse that Game of Thrones was accused of rushing. And there's real weight behind this reading because, book hat on for a moment, no events, direction only. The histories of this period do not describe a beloved queen ruling a grateful city. They describe a spiral, suspicion, punishment, a capital that welcomed her, and then, step by step, stopped seeing her as a queen at all. The show knows where the river runs. Maybe the parallels are simply honest signposts. Reading 2, it's misdirection. The show knows exactly what we expect from a Targaryen queen surrounded by fire imagery because its own franchise taught us. So it's dressing Rhaenyra in Daenerys' iconography to make us assume madness, so that the actual fall, when it comes, can be about something else entirely, something smaller and sadder and more human. Grief that never got to heal, advisors pulling her in opposite directions, a treasury someone emptied before she arrived. Under this reading, the Daenerys costume is a trap for the audience, and the tragedy is that we, like the realm, will call her mad when she was really just alone. And reading 3, the one I find most interesting, it's commentary. It's not about her at all. Look at what this episode actually showed. Every single problem on her desk, the empty vault, the starving city, the rats, the hostile faith, the broken oaths, existed before she sat down. And the vault deserves an extra beat here, because I don't believe for a second that gold evaporated. Neither do the book readers watching, and I'll leave it at this. The histories strongly suggest the old regime made sure the crown she captured would be a hollow one. Which changes the whole picture, doesn't it? She isn't failing because she's a bad ruler. She was handed a ship that was scuttled on purpose before she ever touched the wheel, and now she has to squeeze a starving city out of engineered desperation, and the city will remember the squeezing, not the engineering. The show may be arguing that the throne itself is the machine, that any ruler, seated on that chair, with dragons for arms and no gold and a realm that only respects fear, gets processed into the same shape. Not because of blood or madness, but because the job is built that way. Remember the rats. The rot is inherited. Under this reading, the Daenerys parallels aren't a prophecy about one woman. They're a pattern the system prints onto everyone, and we're just watching the press come down again. So which is it? Here's my honest answer. And then one more layer that I think most videos on this topic will miss. I think it's reading 3, wearing reading 1 as clothing. I think the show is genuinely charting a darkening, the histories being what they are, but it's framing that darkening as something done to her as much as something in her. And the layer underneath, the clever part, is this. Fire and Blood, the book all of this comes from, isn't a story. It's a fake history written in world by chroniclers who never met her, most of them hostile, all of them writing decades later with agendas. The real Rhaenyra inside the fiction is unknowable. She exists only through the words of men who needed her to be a monster or a martyr, which means the show has a choice the book never had. It can show us the woman behind the propaganda, or it can film the propaganda. And I think it's doing something slyer than either. It's showing us an exhausted, grieving, increasingly isolated ruler, and simultaneously showing us how easy it is for the realm and for us on our couches to look at that woman and reach for the word mad. Every time you catch yourself thinking, here we go, Targaryen madness, the show has successfully made you a citizen of King's Landing. You're doing to her exactly what the chroniclers did. That's not a plot, that's a mirror, and it's pointed at the audience. Which is why the Daenerys comparison cuts deeper than a fun Easter egg hunt. Game of Thrones asked, at the very end, too late for most people, whether we'd been cheering for someone we shouldn't have. House of the Dragon is asking the opposite question, early, while there's still time. It's asking whether we're condemning someone we shouldn't, whether a queen who feeds the poor, spares a hostage town, and grieves her son is already being written off by her realm and by her audience because of the shape of her hair and the sound of the violins. So, what to watch from here? 3 things. Count the breaks, like I said, every episode, who talks her down, and how many it takes. Watch Mysaria, because the newly minted Mistress of Whispers is now the closest thing Rhaenyra has to the counselors her descendant lost, and the health of that relationship is the health of the queen. And watch the small folk. They love her this week, with bread in their hands. Bread runs out. The love of a hungry city is a loan, not a gift, and the interest rate is brutal. And on that last one, book readers, put your hands down. I know. One small detail from the histories, so quick spoiler flag if you want to know absolutely nothing. Skip ahead 10 seconds. The chroniclers record the name the small folk of King's Landing eventually gave Rhaenyra. King Maegor with teats. If you don't know the reference, Maegor was the cruelest tyrant in Targaryen history, the standard by which monstrous kings are measured, and look at how that insult is built. They didn't just call her cruel, they made her cruelty male. Even her infamy wasn't allowed to be her own. She gets Maegor's crimes and a slur about her body in the same breath. That, right there, is my whole point about the chroniclers, compressed into 4 words. The record didn't just judge this queen, it judged her as a woman every single time, and the show knows we're watching with that record in our back pocket. One more image before the vote, and it's the neatest inversion in this whole comparison. Remember what Daenerys did in Meereen, in her hardest moment as a ruler. She chained her own dragons in the dark because they had become a danger to the people. Now think about King's Landing, where the dragons of this era sleep in the dragon pit, in the dark, in the heart of a hungry, frightened city. Same image, chained dragons, crowded city. But history doesn't always run the same direction twice, so when this show lingers on the dragon pit, and it will, ask yourself one question and hold on to it for the rest of the season. Which way is the danger pointing? Now it's your turn, and this is a genuine 3-way vote. Reading 1, foreshadowing, she becomes the mad queen of her era, and the show is telling us straight. Reading 2, misdirection, the Daenerys imagery is a trap, and her fall will be about something else. Or reading 3, commentary, the throne is the machine, and it would do this to anyone. Vote in the comments, defend your reading, and I'll pin the best argued answer before the next episode, whichever side it's on. If you're new here, this whole season I've been tracking how Rhaenyra keeps winning the board and losing the players. The State of the War video, the Coreless Dinner video, and yesterday's video about the 2 men who will actually decide this war are all linked below, and they'll catch you up on everything. See you before the next episode. And in the meantime, when the violins start screeching, pay attention to what you assume. The show certainly is